Ancient mysteries, the real history behind. No alien claims, invented translations, or unsupported supernatural explanations are presented as historical fact. Research was checked against museum, UNESCO and peer-reviewed/scientific sources available online. Introduction: The rule of the journey. Tonight we are going to travel through some of the most fascinating mysteries in ancient history. But this is not a story about aliens landing beside pyramids. It is not a story about magical civilizations with technology thousands of years ahead of their time. And it is not a collection of legends presented as facts. Everything in this journey begins with something real. A monument that archaeologists can excavate. A machine that can be examined. A city that can be mapped. A writing system that can be studied even though it cannot yet be read. A landscape that still preserves marks made by people thousands of years ago. The mystery begins after the evidence. That is the line we will keep throughout this documentary. When historians know something, we will say that we know it. When archaeologists have a strong interpretation, we will call it an interpretation. When researchers disagree, we will tell you. And when nobody knows the answer, we will leave the question open. Ancient history is sometimes less dramatic than a legend. But it is often much more astonishing. Because the real past contains people who built monumental structures before cities as we normally imagine them, organized enormous trade networks, engineered sophisticated machines, transformed entire landscapes, created writing systems we still cannot read, and built cities whose walls preserve ordinary arguments, advertisements, prayers, and political messages. So tonight, do not listen for a single secret. Listen for the fragments. Because the deeper we go into the past, the more we discover that history is not a finished story. It is a puzzle. And every generation finds a few more pieces. Chapter 1: Göbekli Tepe, Before Cities. More than 11,000 years ago, people living in what is now southeastern Turkey built something that forced archaeologists to reconsider old assumptions about the beginning of monumental architecture. The site is Göbekli Tepe. Its oldest major layers date to roughly the 10th millennium BCE. Archaeologists have uncovered monumental circular or oval structures with enormous T-shaped limestone pillars. Some pillars carry carved images of animals and other symbols. The scale is difficult to comprehend. These were not little stones placed casually in the ground. Some pillars are several meters tall and weigh many tons. And here is where the mystery becomes important. Göbekli Tepe was built before the period when large permanent cities became common. For a long time, popular versions of history imagine the sequence rather simply. First, humans were hunters and gatherers. Then, agriculture appeared. Then villages appeared. Then cities. Then monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe complicates that story. The site shows that communities of hunter-gatherers could organize substantial labor and create monumental structures before the fully developed urban world of later civilizations. But we need to be careful. Göbekli Tepe does not prove that agriculture was invented because people wanted to build monuments. It does not prove that every monument was a temple in the modern sense. It does not prove that the people suddenly became civilized. Those are modern categories. What we can say is that the site provides direct archaeological evidence of complex communal activity during the Neolithic period. The pillars are particularly striking. Some show animals, snakes, foxes, birds, and other creatures. The images are not merely random decoration. Their repeated appearance suggests that symbolism mattered. But what did the symbols mean? That is where the evidence becomes quieter. We can recognize an animal. We can measure a pillar. We can reconstruct a building. But we cannot ask the people who carved the stone what a particular animal represented. We can propose interpretations. We cannot turn those interpretations into certainty. The site also contains evidence of intentional backfilling. Structures were eventually filled with sediment and debris, then other construction activity took place. That means Göbekli Tepe was not simply built once and abandoned. The landscape changed through repeated human activity. Imagine standing there thousands of years ago. There are no modern roads. No electricity. No cranes. No steel tools. Instead, there are stone tools, human hands, ropes, or other organic technologies that have mostly disappeared from the archaeological record. A community has to quarry limestone. It has to shape enormous pillars. It has to move them. It has to organize workers. It has to feed the people doing the work. And it has to decide why the effort is worth making. That last question may be the deepest mystery. What made these communities gather? Was it ritual? Feasting? Social alliance? Ancestor-related practices? A combination of purposes? Researchers continue to examine these possibilities. And the uncertainty is productive because Göbekli Tepe changes how we think about early human societies. Complexity did not suddenly appear when the first city walls went up. Humans were already capable of cooperation, symbolism, and large-scale construction. The archaeological record is simply revealing more of it. Göbekli Tepe, therefore, does not tell us that our ancestors were secretly modern. It tells us something more interesting. They were already fully human. They could organize. They could imagine. They could create symbols. They could invest enormous effort in places that mattered to them. And they did all of this long before the pyramids of Egypt, long before Rome, and thousands of years before the first classical civilizations that dominate school textbooks. The site is a reminder that civilization did not begin with a single switch being turned on. It developed through thousands of experiments in cooperation, settlement, ritual, agriculture, craft, and exchange. And then, much later, in another part of the world, people built cities whose organization still surprises archaeologists. To understand the next mystery, we travel east. Chapter 2: The Indus Valley. The silent civilization between roughly 2500 and 2000 BCE, one of the largest urban civilizations of the ancient world, flourished across parts of what are now Pakistan and western India. It is commonly called the Indus Valley Civilization or Harappan Civilization. Its cities included Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. The remains reveal something extraordinary. The streets were laid out in organized patterns. Buildings were constructed from standardized bricks. Drainage systems were integrated into urban life. Craft production was extensive. Trade reached beyond the Indus region. The British Museum notes evidence for trade with the Persian Gulf and the Oxus region, and Indus-style seals have been found far beyond the core cities. This was not an isolated civilization. It was connected. But then we encounter a strange problem. The civilization left writing. We can see the signs. We can identify repeated patterns. We can find inscriptions on seals. But the script remains undeciphered. That means we have archaeological evidence without a readable autobiography. Think about how much that changes. Suppose archaeologists discover a city with thousands of buildings. They can map the streets. They can examine food remains. They can analyze pottery. They can reconstruct trade. But if the writing cannot be read, the voices of the people remain partly hidden. The surviving inscriptions are often short, which makes decipherment especially difficult. A short sequence gives researchers less grammatical and contextual information than a long document. This has not stopped people from trying. Many proposed decipherments have appeared over the decades. Some claim that the script records an early form of a known language. Others have proposed entirely different linguistic relationships. But no decipherment has achieved broad scholarly acceptance. That means a responsible documentary must resist the temptation to announce a secret translation. The mystery is not that somebody has secretly solved it. The mystery is that we still cannot confidently hear what these signs say. And yet the civilization speaks to us in other ways. Consider the drainage. A drainage channel is not glamorous. It does not have the visual drama of a gold mask. But it can reveal something profound. Someone designed it. Someone built it. Someone maintained it. People had expectations about water, cleanliness, streets, and buildings. The city therefore tells us about administration and everyday life. Then there are the seals. Many carry animal images and short inscriptions. They were part of administrative and economic practices. Some Indus seals or seal types appear outside the Indus region, showing that goods and people moved across long distances. This gives us a picture of a connected Bronze Age world. The Indus cities were not floating alone in history. They were part of a network. So what happened to them? This is where the phrase lost civilization can become misleading. The cities did not necessarily disappear in a single catastrophe. Urban life changed. Populations shifted. Economic networks changed. Environmental factors, including changing river systems and monsoon patterns, have been investigated as part of the explanation. But the evidence does not require one dramatic event that killed everyone. People continued living in the broader region. The transformation of urban civilization was a process. That distinction is important. When we say a civilization collapsed, we can accidentally imagine a movie scene. One morning there is a magnificent city. That night everyone is gone. Real history is usually slower. A city loses political importance. A river changes. Trade becomes less profitable. Climate conditions change. People move. Buildings are reused. Craft traditions transform. A writing system stops being used. The old city becomes part of the landscape. Centuries pass. And eventually the people who live nearby may not know exactly who built the ruins. That is how a civilization can become lost, without its people simply vanishing. The Indus Valley mystery therefore has several layers. Who were these people? What language did they speak? What did their symbols mean? How was political power organized? Why did their urban system change? Archaeology has answers to some parts. For others, the answer remains open. And perhaps the most haunting part is the script. Imagine holding a seal made more than 4,000 years ago. A person carved those signs. They knew exactly what they meant. Perhaps another person read them immediately. Today we can see the marks. But the meaning is silent. That silence is one of the greatest mysteries in ancient history. Chapter 3: The Antikythera Mechanism. A machine lost at us, and now imagine a completely different kind of mystery. Not a city. Not a monument. A machine. At the beginning of the 20th century, sponge divers discovered an ancient shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. Among the objects recovered from the wreck was a heavily corroded bronze mechanism. At first, it looked like little more than a mass of damaged metal. Then researchers recognized gears. The object became known as the Antikythera Mechanism. It dates to around the 2nd century BCE. Modern imaging has transformed our understanding of it. X-ray tomography allowed researchers to see structures hidden inside the corrosion. Inscriptions on the surviving fragments provided additional clues. The mechanism was designed to represent astronomical cycles. It could model the movements and cycles of the sun and moon, and was capable of predicting eclipses using astronomical cycles that incorporated Babylonian knowledge. Later research has proposed a sophisticated display of the ancient cosmos, including planetary cycles. This is why the mechanism is sometimes called an ancient computer. The comparison is useful as long as we understand what it means. It was not an electronic computer. It did not run software. It did not have electricity. It was a mechanical calculator made from gears. And that is exactly why it matters. It shows that ancient Greek scientific and engineering traditions could produce extraordinarily sophisticated mechanical devices. The surviving mechanism is incomplete. Only a portion of the original survives, divided into fragments. That creates another mystery. What did the complete machine look like? How was it manufactured? Who designed it? Was it a unique object? Or was it one example of a tradition whose other machines disappeared? We do not know. This last question is especially important. Archaeological survival is selective. A bronze gear can survive. A wooden gear may rot. A workshop can burn. A craftsman's notes can disappear. A machine can be dismantled and recycled. If only one extraordinary mechanism survives, it is dangerous to assume it was the only one. At the same time, it is equally dangerous to imagine an entire ancient world filled with machines just as complex. The evidence does not allow that conclusion. What it does allow is something remarkable. By the 2nd century BCE, Greek engineers could combine mathematical astronomy, gear systems, and careful craftsmanship into a compact device capable of representing celestial cycles. That means the ancient scientific world was more mechanically sophisticated than many older histories assumed. There is also a beautiful irony. The machine survived because it sank. The sea destroyed some of it through corrosion. But the wreck also protected it from being melted down and reused. A device that might otherwise have disappeared into the recycling stream of history became a time capsule. For 2,000 years it waited underwater. Then divers found it. Then generations of scientists studied it. And every improvement in imaging technology revealed another layer of the machine. This is what makes the Antikythera story so powerful. The mystery did not disappear when researchers discovered the object. It changed shape. First, the mystery was, what is this? Then, how does it work? Then, how advanced was the technology? Then, who made it? Then, how widespread was this tradition? Some questions have answers. Others do not. That is real historical mystery. Not a secret that somebody invented. A genuine gap between what survived and what once existed. and sometimes the gap itself is the story. Chapter 4: Roman Dodecahedra, the objects with no instruction manual. Across parts of the former Roman Empire, archaeologists have found strange hollow bronze objects. They have 12 pentagonal faces. Circular holes pierce the faces. Small knobs sit at the corners. They are called Roman dodecahedra. Their appearance is so unusual that people naturally ask what they were used for. And the honest answer is that archaeologists still do not have a universally accepted answer. That uncertainty has produced a huge number of theories. Measuring instrument, surveying device, candle holder, textile tool, ritual object, game, craft tool. And in recent years, new experimental hypotheses have appeared. A 2026 Exarch Journal study tested whether some dodecahedra could have been used as forming tools for standardized wax objects associated with sealing or identification. The experiments found that the geometry could plausibly help produce repeatable wax forms. That is interesting. But it is not the same as proving that this was their original purpose. This distinction is essential. Experimental archaeology can demonstrate that an object is capable of performing a task. It does not automatically demonstrate that ancient people actually used it for that task. Other recent hypotheses have also been proposed. That does not mean all of them are equally strong. It means the mystery is still active. There is another reason these objects are fascinating. They are mostly found in the northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire, rather than evenly across the entire Roman world. That distribution may tell us something about regional traditions. Perhaps they were connected with local craft practices. Perhaps they had social or symbolic meaning. Perhaps several related objects served different functions. We should not assume that every dodecahedron had exactly the same purpose. The absence of ancient written instructions makes the problem harder. No surviving Roman text says, "This is a dodecahedron, and this is how you use it." No contemporary illustration has securely settled the question. So the object remains a physical question. What can its shape tell us? What wear marks does it have? What residues remain? Where was it found? What objects were nearby? Can experimental archaeology reproduce a plausible use? These questions are much more useful than simply asking which theory sounds the most exciting. The Roman dodecahedron teaches a larger lesson. An object can survive while its meaning disappears. Imagine finding a modern object thousands of years from now. Suppose the object is made of plastic and metal, but the plastic has survived and the context is gone. A future archaeologist might identify its shape, but completely misunderstand its purpose. Maybe it was part of a kitchen appliance. Maybe it was a toy. Maybe it was medical equipment. Maybe it was a piece of industrial machinery. Without context, even our own civilization could become mysterious. That is what happened to the Romans. The dodecahedron survived. The explanation did not. And so the object sits quietly at the edge between knowledge and uncertainty. Chapter 5: The Nazca Lines. A landscape made into a message in the desert of southern Peru. The ground itself becomes a work of enormous scale. Long lines stretch across the plain. Geometric figures cover the surface. Animals appear in enormous outlines. Birds, monkeys, other creatures. Some figures are hundreds of meters long. UNESCO describes the lines and geoglyphs of Nazca and Palpa as one of archaeology's great enigmas, created across a long period beginning around 500 BCE and continuing into the early centuries CE. The environment is one reason they survived. The desert is extraordinarily dry. The lines were made by disturbing the surface and exposing lighter material beneath the darker stones. This technique sounds simple. But simple does not mean easy. The creators had to plan large shapes. They had to maintain lines over long distances. They had to coordinate labor. And they repeatedly transformed the same landscape over generations. The real mystery is not how a human being could draw a line. The real mystery is why communities invested so much effort in doing it. Popular culture often presents the question as though the lines must have been made for beings flying above the earth. But there is no archaeological requirement for that explanation. The people who created the lines were capable of planning large landscapes from the ground. Some lines appear to function as paths or tracks. UNESCO notes interpretations connecting the geoglyphs with ritual and astronomical functions. Other archaeological interpretations emphasize ceremonial movement and pilgrimage. That means the landscape may have been experienced by walking through it. A giant figure does not have to be designed for one person standing in the air. It can be part of a sacred landscape experienced through movement. This is a crucial difference between seeing a monument from above and experiencing it as an ancient participant. Imagine walking along a straight line in the desert. You see the horizon. You see mountains. You see the direction of the path. You encounter another line. You enter a large geometric space. The ritual experience may have been about movement, distance, direction, community, and place. The complete figure may not have been the only thing that mattered. There is also evidence that the geoglyphs were created over a very long period. That means there was not one Nazca Lines project. Different communities and generations contributed. Some designs overlapped. Some were altered. The landscape accumulated meaning. This makes the mystery even more interesting. A place can become sacred because people repeatedly use it. A later generation may inherit an old line and add another. A path can become a ritual route. A ritual route can become part of collective memory. Eventually, the landscape becomes an enormous archive of human activity. The desert preserves that archive unusually well. That is why the lines survived for centuries. The people who made them did not know that future aircraft would photograph them. They did not build them for our cameras. They built them for their own world. That is perhaps the most important way to think about them. The Nazca Lines are not a message to modern humanity. They are evidence of an ancient society communicating with itself, its environment, and its sacred world. We are the later observers. And we are still trying to understand the language of the landscape. Chapter 6, Linear A. When the writing survives but the language does not. On Bronze Age Crete, people wrote. They recorded information. They managed goods. They used signs on clay and other materials. One of the scripts they used is called Linear A. The problem is simple to state. We cannot securely read it. That makes Linear A one of the most tantalizing mysteries in Mediterranean archaeology. The script is not imaginary. The inscriptions are real. Archaeologists can identify signs. They can compare their shapes. They can study the places where inscriptions were found. They can examine repeated sequences. but the underlying language remains undeciphered. This is different from saying that Minoan civilization is completely unknown. Far from it. Archaeology has revealed palatial complexes, settlements, pottery, seals, frescoes, trade connections, and religious practices. We know that Crete was part of a wider Bronze Age Mediterranean world. We know that administration mattered. We know that writing was part of that administrative system. But we do not have the privilege of opening a Minoan letter and reading it like a modern document. Linear B provides an important comparison. Linear B was deciphered in the 20th century and records an early form of Greek used by Mycenaean administrations. The signs of Linear A and Linear B share some similarities. But that does not mean Linear A is simply an earlier version of Greek that can be read by replacing symbols. Writing systems can be adapted. Languages can change. Signs can retain visual relationships while representing different sounds or words. So the mystery remains. What language did Linear A record? What did the administrative text say? What did people call their gods? What did they call their cities? How did they describe themselves? We cannot answer these questions with confidence. And this is where fake history often begins. Someone sees a few signs and claims to have discovered a hidden translation. Someone else connects them to a favorite ancient language. Another person claims the signs prove contact with a mysterious civilization. Without broad scholarly testing, these claims remain speculation. The responsible approach is more modest. We can study the evidence. We can compare inscriptions. We can examine archaeological context. We can test linguistic hypotheses. But until a convincing decipherment emerges, the text remains silent. There is something deeply human about that silence. A scribe once knew exactly what the marks meant. Perhaps they were writing a list. Perhaps a transaction. Perhaps a religious record. Perhaps a message. The clay preserved the signs, but not the key. Thousands of years later, we are standing outside the locked door. Chapter 7: Pompeii, the city that did not know it was about to become a time capsule. In the year 79 CE, a Roman city near Mount Vesuvius was transformed forever. Pompeii was a busy community. People lived there. They worked. They sold food. They ran businesses. They went to baths. They worshipped. They argued. They wrote messages on walls. They repaired buildings. They lived ordinary lives. That ordinary quality is exactly what makes Pompeii so important. Then Vesuvius erupted. UNESCO records that the eruption engulfed Pompeii and Herculaneum, burying Pompeii under ash and lapilli while Herculaneum was overwhelmed by pyroclastic surges and flows. The destruction was catastrophic. But it also created an extraordinary archaeological time capsule. Because buildings and objects were buried rapidly, many aspects of daily life survived. Political graffiti, commercial spaces, wall paintings, domestic architecture, food remains, tools, human remains. At Pompeii, Plaster casting techniques later allowed archaeologists to capture the shapes left in volcanic deposits by decomposed bodies. The result is one of the most emotionally powerful archaeological records in existence. But Pompeii should not be reduced to the moment of death. The city had a history before the eruption. Buildings had been repaired. Some structures had changed function. Earthquakes had affected the community. People were adapting to a changing environment. The city was not frozen in perfect condition before the eruption. It was already changing. This matters because archaeological sites are often treated as snapshots. They are not always snapshots. They are layered. A house may contain renovations from several generations. A wall may be painted over. A shop may change owners. A road may be repaired. A public building may be rebuilt after an earthquake. Pompeii preserves not just one moment, but traces of many moments compressed beneath the final disaster. And then there is the graffiti. The walls preserve political campaigning, personal messages, advertisements, and insults. That means Pompeii gives us something ancient history rarely gives us. Ordinary voices. The elite left literature. Governments left monuments. Kings left inscriptions. But ordinary people often leave almost nothing. At Pompeii, they wrote on walls. A person could wake up, walk through a street, and see political slogans written nearby. A shopkeeper could advertise. A lover could leave a message. Someone could insult an enemy. These small traces make the ancient world feel unexpectedly close. The people of Pompeii were not thinking about becoming historical evidence. They were living. And that is why Pompeii is one of the most powerful archaeological mysteries. Not because we do not know what happened. We know the eruption happened. We know Vesuvius buried the city. The mystery is more intimate. How much can we reconstruct about a person's life from the objects they left behind? What did they eat? Where did they work? What did they believe? Who were their friends? What did they worry about? Archaeology can answer some questions. Others disappear forever. And perhaps that is why Pompeii feels so alive. The city was destroyed. But in being buried, it preserved thousands of small details that would normally have vanished. Chapter 8: The Maya. The civilization that did not disappear. There is a famous image of the Maya that needs correcting. A great city stands in the jungle. The buildings are empty. The people are gone. The civilization has vanished. It is a powerful image. It is also misleading. Maya people did not disappear. Millions of Maya people live today, and Maya languages and cultural traditions continue. What changed was the political and urban landscape of particular regions. Sites such as Tikal were major political, economic, and military centers. UNESCO describes Tikal as containing monumental temples, palaces, residences, roads, reservoirs, and inscriptions recording dynastic history and relationships with distant Maya centers. The city was part of a complex political world. It was not an isolated jungle kingdom. Maya rulers competed. They formed alliances. They fought wars. They controlled resources. They commissioned monuments. They participated in networks that stretched across Mesoamerica. And eventually, many major lowland centers declined. This is often called the classic Maya collapse. But there was not one single collapse affecting every Maya community in exactly the same way. Some regions declined earlier. Others remained powerful. Some cities continued. Political systems changed. Population patterns shifted. Environmental pressures, warfare, drought, and political instability have all been investigated as possible contributors. The archaeology suggests that several factors could interact. A drought can reduce agricultural production. Reduced food availability can increase political tension. Political tension can produce warfare. Warfare can disrupt trade. Disrupted trade can weaken rulers. A weakened ruler may struggle to maintain monumental construction or public infrastructure. The process can become self-reinforcing. This is not a simple story. It is a system. And that is one reason the Maya are so fascinating. Their writing has been substantially deciphered. We can read many inscriptions. We can recover names of rulers. We can reconstruct dynastic histories. We can identify wars and alliances. The ancient Maya therefore speak to us more directly than some other civilizations whose scripts remain unreadable. And what they say is surprisingly familiar. They tell us about power, about competition, about memory, about ambition, about religion, about conflict, about human beings trying to control an uncertain world. The great cities eventually became ruins. The forests grew around them. Centuries passed. But the people did not vanish. This distinction matters beyond Maya history. A city can die while a culture survives. A political system can collapse while families continue. A language can change while descendants remain. An empire can disappear from the map without its people disappearing from the world. That is why the phrase lost civilization must be used carefully. Sometimes what is lost is not the people. And that brings us to the final question. If ancient history contains so many mysteries, how do we know what is real? Conclusion. How to tell real ancient history from a good story? The ancient world is full of mysteries. But not every mystery deserves the same level of confidence. Some things are firmly established. Göbekli Tepe is real. The Indus cities are real. The Antikythera Mechanism is real. Roman Dodecahedra are real. The Nazca lines are real. Linear A inscriptions are real. Pompeii was destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius. Maya cities such as Tikal and Copan were real centers of powerful societies. The mystery begins when we ask questions the evidence cannot completely answer. Why exactly were certain Göbekli Tepe structures used? What did the Indus script say? Who manufactured the Antikythera mechanism? What exactly were Roman dodecahedra for? What did every Nazca geoglyph mean? What language did Linear A represent? Why did different Maya cities decline at different times? Those are legitimate mysteries. But there is a temptation to turn uncertainty into certainty. A missing answer becomes a supernatural explanation. A complicated process becomes a single catastrophe. An unusual object becomes impossible technology. A city becomes a lost civilization. And a hypothesis becomes a fact. That is how historical misinformation spreads. The real discipline of history is being able to say three different things. We know. We think. We do not know. Those three sentences are not equally exciting to a sensational storyteller, but they are essential to understanding the past. And sometimes we do not know is the most exciting sentence of all, because it means the story is not finished. A new excavation could change the picture. A new inscription could provide a missing clue. A new scanning technology could reveal something hidden inside an object. A new archaeological discovery could connect two sites. A future researcher could find the evidence that answers a question people have argued about for generations. That is how history moves forward. Not by inventing certainty, by discovering evidence. So when you look at an ancient ruin, remember that you are not looking at a dead world. You are looking at a surviving fragment of a living world. The people who built those places had names. They had families. They had fears. They had ambitions. They made mistakes. They celebrated. They traded. They argued. They built. They destroyed. They remembered. And eventually, time covered their footprints. But not completely. A carved animal survives. A gear survives. A wall survives. A line in the desert survives. A city survives beneath volcanic ash. A symbol survives on a piece of clay. And thousands of years later, we are still here trying to understand. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of ancient history. Not that the past was filled with impossible people, but that ordinary human lives could leave traces strong enough to reach us across thousands of years. And perhaps somewhere beneath the soil, beneath the sea, inside a forgotten archive, or in a fragment that nobody has yet recognized, another piece of the story is waiting. We simply have not found it yet.